Are you sick and tired of being elite? Do you wish you could spend more time studying and remember less? Are you looking to feel overwhelmed with more content? Look no further. In this video, I'm going to tell you 4 ways that you can absolutely ruin your learning efficiency. And for some of you, you may already even be doing some of these. Make sure to stick around to the end because number 4 is my personal favorite way to learn absolutely nothing, even if I study for hours. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Justin Sung. I'm a learning coach, learning researcher, and head of learning at I Can Study. I'm a former medical doctor, and for the last decade, I've worked with tens of thousands of people to teach them to learn more efficiently, which also means that I have a lot of experience seeing how people can work inefficiently. Before we jump in, I'd appreciate if you give this video a like. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm. So coming in at number 1, make sure the way you study is completely irrelevant. So what does this mean? You know how there are different ways that you can be tested? For example, you can get a very direct fact recall kind of question. For example, name the parts of this animal cell. But you could also get a question that's like, this medication affects the cell's tRNA function in this way. What is the potential impact it could have on protein synthesis? So you can see it's a lot more interconnected. It requires us to draw on lots of different concepts and how they influence each other. It's different from just like an isolated fact recall. There's different types of knowledge. Even in the workplace, that's exactly the same. We might have problems that we're trying to solve that's like, what's the process for cleaning this data set again? Versus using your knowledge in a really interconnected way, like if the data set is this small, then what are still some relevant analyses that I can do that give me an insight into the business's recent performance? So you can see that the latter requires a lot more of that high-level synthesis, drawing on your understanding of lots of different concepts. So if you make sure that the methods that you're using to study are aligned with the different types of ways that you need to retrieve that knowledge. For example, if you need to retrieve the knowledge in these interconnected ways, using a non-linear relational method of studying that allows you to see the big picture and the connections and figure out the influence and relationship between them, and then you can pad up and supplement that with direct fact recall isolated methods, for example, like flashcards. If you do that, then you'd have a robust and comprehensive study system that means that when you're studying, the type of knowledge that you're developing is going to be high quality. And as a result, you'll be able to use that knowledge in the right way for whatever your needs are. But obviously, if you do that, then you're running into the risk where you might actually spend a lot of time studying, and then you'd actually also learn a lot too, which we don't want that now. So we have to make sure that we don't do that. Instead, make sure that your methods of studying are just purely memorization and isolated fact recall. Don't think at all about how you need to use knowledge in different ways and how the method of studying might actually influence that. To make sure you're wasting as much time as possible, you have to make sure that the methods you're using are as irrelevant to the way you need to use your knowledge as possible. Something that you definitely should do is you really should like this video. Secondly, time is precious, and like we've already talked about, it's important that you waste as much of that time as possible. One great way to waste hours and hours of time, in fact, like almost all of the time that you spend studying, is to make sure that you learn the wrong thing in the wrong way. This one's a little bit more complicated, so let me explain. The human brain builds knowledge and memory in a very specific way. We all start off with a set of prior knowledge, either from previously studying the topic or just general knowledge you may have picked up throughout life. Now, when new information enters into the brain, then our brain tries to see how it's related to what we already know. When that new information is related to a lot of our existing knowledge, then our brain knows how to think about it. It's more easily integrated and consolidated, which is what forms a stronger, more robust memory. And because it's connected to lots of other things, we can use that knowledge in many different ways. It's kind of like a town that is connected by lots of different highways versus, let's say, a town that you can only reach, by boat because it's on an island. Now, the thing is, though, that when we're learning things in the normal kind of real world, we can't really control all the time whether the information that we're learning is going to be relevant or not. And especially this is the case in formal education, where the information is actually being fed to you in a very specific order. And this could be reading it through a book, or it could be someone speaking to you, but the idea is that new information is actually scattered all around. And that information isn't always going to be something that your brain finds relevant. It's not always going to see that there's lots of different connections. And so in order to make sure that the time that we spend studying creates the highest quality memory and depth of understanding possible, what we need to do is we need to scan through the material to pick out the parts that our brain would find the most relevant. In other words, what in the new information feels like it is the most related to and connected to what you already know. And that could be a lot or it could be very little. But by starting in this way, we're able to extract out new parts of information, maybe not in the same, usually actually, not in the same order as what's given to us. And then as we do that, our knowledge is going to grow and grow and grow. And that means that as we learn more new information, we have more and more points of reference. So, for example, if this piece of information was new and previously it would have had nothing to really connect to, well, now that we've got a better foundation, we can actually form some new connections with it that we might not have been able to do 1 or 2 hours ago. And this is the benefit of going by relevance. When you start with what your brain feels like it's better at holding on to and what feels more relevant, it allows you to build relevance on top of relevance. And as we learn, it starts to make more and more sense. It's actually getting progressively easier to deal with. It's kind of like completing a jigsaw puzzle. When you start with a jigsaw puzzle, if you just start from like a random part of the middle that looks the same as any other part of the puzzle, it's actually really hard to solve it because you have to dig through all the hundreds of different pieces to find the right one. What you should do is just to start with the edge pieces, the one that's got a flat edge on one side. And then as you complete the edge pieces, then you start getting more to work with. And you can fill in from the edges towards the middle. And this means that as you go, it gets easier and easier because you're building that bigger picture. And also, because there's more stuff that's consolidated, there's less pieces in the box for you to scatter through to figure out how to make sense of it all. It becomes more a matter of finding the right thing and just fitting it into the gap that is still in your puzzle. So if you're controlling the order in which you're learning the information based on relevance, and this is a method that I call order control, then this means that you have a very, very high chance of learning a lot and having really great depth of understanding as well as really high quality memory after a single study session, which would be terrible in this case. So to avoid doing that, we need to make sure that we are learning things in just the same order as what was given to us, and we're never really thinking about whether it's relevant or not, and we're never really looking for things that are more relevant. Instead, what we should do is just take each piece of information one by one, try to memorize and completely understand each individual piece of information so that one day, hopefully, we form that big picture. It would be kind of like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle by just staring at a box full of pieces and then individually try to memorize each piece until somehow you can magically see how it all fits together and forms the bigger picture, which is incredibly inefficient and maybe even impossible. Perfect. But what's even better is that if we do that, then our brain is going to have no idea what to do with all of these individual isolated pieces of information, and so it's not going to hold on to it very strongly either. For example, if you're trying to memorize each individual jigsaw piece one by one, then you probably get through 5 or 6 pieces before you start forgetting what the first one looked like. And so in that case, you now need to spend more time to go back and relearn the stuff that you already covered, but now you've forgotten. And in doing so, you create a never-ending backlog of things for you to constantly repeatedly learn because you didn't learn it the right way the first time. And by doing that, we can waste even more time. And as long as every time we're trying to relearn something that we forgot, we're just relearning it in the same way that we learned it the first time, then we can guarantee that we're going to forget like half of it again. So we're never really able to get on top of the material that we're constantly forgetting. So if you wanted to be really overwhelmed with work all the time, and as you study more and more, it just gets harder and more overwhelming, then this is going to be perfect for you. Thirdly, and this is critical, we have to never actually improve. Every year of our lives, challenges are just going to get continually harder. So imagine if your abilities and skills grew faster than the challenges got harder. Imagine how efficient you would become if every week you're getting 5 or 10 or even 1% more efficient than you are now. Yes, it may not be enough for an immediate short-term goal like in the next few months, but over time, your ability to handle challenges would grow massively, and we can't have that happening. So to make sure that we never really improve or grow, we have to always choose comfort. The key components to growth and self-development is self-awareness and critical reflection, which sound like kind of fluffy words, but it's actually very logical. It just means that we know what we are doing, why we are doing it, and whether we think it's working or not. For example, most people learn a certain way because they just picked it up from their friends, or it's just a habit of learning that they picked up over time. And a lot of people feel very insecure about changing their methods. And so as a result, they choose comfort. Let me give you an example. One of my students is finishing their second year of medical school at King's College London, and they started off studying 4 or 5 hours a day. But we found that a lot of the time that she was spending was wasted. There was a lot of inefficient methods being used. She was relearning a lot of what she'd already forgotten. In fact, of the 4 or 5 hours a day of studying, like 3 or 4 of those hours were spent on just kind of relearning and recapping the stuff that she had already covered before. And also the methods that she was using was not really aligned, and so even though she was studying it, she wasn't really able to use the knowledge very well for her needs either. She'd kind of resigned herself to the fact that there are some difficult curvier questions in the exam that are going to come up that she's just not going to be able to answer. So she actually ended up joining my program, and after a whole year, she sent me this big long email, and she was like, the techniques aren't working, I'm not getting any better, my results aren't any better, and she was getting really stressed out because she was about to enter into her second year, which is, even harder. So I jumped on a call with her to see what was going on, and it turns out that for the whole year, she had been so afraid of making any real and meaningful changes to her methods because, just in case she screws up, that she had never even tried practicing the techniques for more than a few hours. She had effectively spent her whole year just dipping her toes in and out, rather than starting with dipping her toes and then eventually kind of like submerging herself more and more. And so for her, the comfort of holding on to and keeping with her current methods and habits was more worthwhile than the discomfort associated with making a change. So here's the learning point from the story, is that instead of actually challenging ourselves and asking ourselves, is this really working? Or do I just want to believe that it's working because if it's not, that means that there's too much uncertainty and discomfort associated with accepting it and then having to make a change. Instead of asking ourselves that, by choosing comfort instead of making changes, we can guarantee that nothing will change, and so we'll never improve. By choosing comfort and doubling down on methods that weren't working for her, she managed to spend the whole year on trying to improve without actually ever improving. Now, unfortunately, that was a year ago, and then I had that call and the meeting with her, and I sort of told her, this is what's going on, and then she decided to really commit herself. And so now, apparently, in her recent email, she said that she's down to studying only 2 or 3 hours a day. So, that's unfortunate. It's really amazing how much people can change when they stay open-minded and commit to making well thought out strategic decisions. So yeah, we can't have that, no. But that doesn't have to be you. As long as you follow the tips in this video, don't worry. I promise you will not improve. And finally, number 4, my favorite way to learn absolutely nothing, even if my eyes bleed from studying so much. Measure your learning success with metrics that mean nothing. A metric is something that you use to measure something else. For example, a metric for how fast you're traveling might be kilometers an hour. A metric for how well a YouTube video is performing could be views or likes. And metrics really matter because it tells us what we care about. It gives us insight into the problem. Back when I was still working as a doctor, one of the things that I hated was that there weren't any metrics on the doctor's well-being or their job satisfaction or the efficiency of the system. The hospital management didn't really care, and if there were any problems, they would never know because they're not measuring it. So no matter how bad things got, there was probably not any action that was going to arise out of it because the problem doesn't exist. And it's the same thing with learning. That student from before, she measured her success with learning based on how many notes she was able to write lectures for in a single day, or the number of lectures she was able to cover. She'd be really happy if she was able to cover 5 lectures in a single day or do 4 years worth of past papers. But since learning is something that happens in our brain, and that's where we need the knowledge, not on paper, those metrics are actually kind of meaningless. How many notes we write, or how many lectures we cover, or how many papers we do, it doesn't actually tell us about the quality of the knowledge that's in our brain's ability to hold on to it or use it in the way that we need to use it. For example, even if she was happy to cover 5 lectures in a day, she didn't really think about the fact that she would be forgetting half of it a week later anyway. So the total amount of time it would take for her to reach the level of knowledge that she actually needs, at the retention level she actually needs, was way longer than just a single study session, but she wasn't measuring any of that. So the problem didn't really exist. And that's the key. If you don't see the problem, you never fix it. Even when she learned better techniques and better methods, she wasn't willing to commit to it because of the fact that it might mean that she covers fewer lectures in a single study session, even though her retention and quality of learning was higher. And so she'd be saving more time overall. And even after she'd learned about how to measure learning more effectively, she didn't actually apply that because it wasn't as convenient to measure as her normal ways of measuring things. And that's how she managed to leave it for a whole year without even realizing what the problem was, which led to her sending me a big long email like, everything is broken, nothing is working. And then I looked at it and I was like, that's not where the problem is. So if you want to make sure that you are blind to any problems, then make sure that you don't think about things too deeply. Do not measure things in a way that is meaningful. Now you might be wondering, how can I know if my metric makes a difference or not? And a few good questions that you can ask yourself are, is there someone that would do better than me even if they were to score lower on the metrics? So for example, in a single study session, is it possible that someone could study and cover less lectures than me, but still perform better? Or you could even make it, is it possible that this metric doesn't necessarily lead to success? Is it possible that the more flashcards I cover or the more past papers I do, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do well? If the answer is yes, then it probably means that the metric that you're using is not going to make the biggest difference, which is excellent. Now, the reason that this is my personal favorite way to ruin your learning efficiency is because it's fundamental. If you don't even see the problem in the first place, you are not even ready to start improving, which is one of the most efficient ways to forever stay inefficient. Use all 4 of these methods, and I guarantee you will struggle with learning your whole life. Don't worry. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss my future uploads. And if for some reason you're interested in learning to be more efficient rather than less for some reason, then you might be interested in this video here around how you can create the perfect, safest, fastest personal development plan. It's a method that I've been using for years. Or if you're looking for a single place to start with my videos so that you can cover the basics as quickly as possible, then check out this playlist here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.